Blessed be this ingathering for our second morning together. Blessed be the work of this day. The hidden things which will be revealed, the things which are revealed, which we will hide, bury inside our soul. The thoughts and words, intuitions which come from outside and spread to each of us, and which rise from inside each of us as gifts to all of us. Blessed be the beauty of the sun on our faces this morning, this old, old sun, as we move into these final days, to this holy place, where we celebrate for an instant that perfect understanding of equilibrium. Equilibrium, that place of perfect balance. There are huge collections of tales from all over the world, which are simply called creation stories. Because, of course, these are the stories collected through time, the stories of how elders explained to each generation how things got the way they are. How come the skunks have stripes, and how come the crows are all black, and how come this and how come that? And the tales are both profound and wonderfully amusing. And of course they are instructive for us looking back on them through time. They're instructive in the sense of grasping the simplicity of many of our essentials, the sun rising, the sun setting. We take for granted. Most people don't even see the sun rising and the sun setting anymore. We know it without experiencing it because of at every level, the complexity of society by the time we've reached into the 21st century now. Again, if you are interested in creation stories, go to any library and you will find shelves of them. And they're wonderful to read, even in terms of making comparisons between the peoples of the Hawaiian Islands and the peoples from other islands, for instance. Worldviews, how different worldviews are. And of course, we are living, obviously, in the present history, today's news, today's headlines, with two conflicting worldviews. So, worldviews, knowing other people's worldviews does not necessarily make for a harmonious world. It's always problematic, isn't it? I'm only going to touch on this ever so briefly. It's kind of like what I said yesterday about images of the Great Mother. We could spend 4 days just talking about images based on creation stories. But we can't do that. But I do want to talk about just this one because it does relate to our historical relationship as Westerners, our worldview coming out of a Western mythology. And Egypt is very much a part of the Western mythology. And it was thousands of years of Egyptian civilization, which of course impacted the area we now call the Holy Land. And of course, because of our Judean-Christian Western society origins, then that means that Egypt impacted those societies, which in turn have impacted our whole Western way of thinking. This is an interesting image, and I'm giving it to you in relationship to the opening chapters, the opening verses, I should say, of the book of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, this is an image, in fact, of a creation story that precedes the very concept of the opening words of the Old Testament. This is the Binu Bird. In Greek, the Greek overlay of Greek society on Egyptian made a number of changes, including a lot of changing of names. Originally, the phoenix was called Binu, B-E-N-U, the Binu Bird. And one of the ancient creation stories from Egypt is about the Binu Bird. And like all these creation stories, it begins the same way. In the beginning, there was nothing. There was only Binu. And Binu, from the beginning of time, flew, floated, moved through this aboriginal nothingness in complete darkness before the birth of light. And at some point in this aboriginal darkness and flight and hovering, Binu opened her beak, and out came this great which floated all through this aboriginal darkness and space. And it was the beginning of all of creation. All that was to be came out of that aboriginal sound. Now this interests me because this would have been a very, very common tale which would have been told in this wonderful creative flux that we call the Mediterranean Sea, which, like all these stories, carried from port to port by merchants and sailors and so on. And this, in my own, as far as I'm concerned, deeply impacted the people who thousands of years later were to write what have become the opening words to what we call the Old Testament, the Bible. In the beginning was the Word, except that sound is the articulation of the word comes out of the sound, so that sound is the origin of word. So here's a myth that is even deeper and underneath the understanding of in the beginning was the Word. Even the word word is possible only because it floats in sound, inside the concept of sound. Another Aboriginal myth coming out of Egypt is light, because all myths originate in darkness, this aboriginal place of darkness. And this is what we know about the universe, that the universe is a black void. And when there are moments of light, they are like miracles inside the black void. This is one of the few creation stories where, in fact, the masculine energy is associated with earth. So here we have the threshold experience, the bottom line, so to speak. And this story is about the beginning of all that is, based on the sexual union of Nut, who was raised up and became the entire vault above, and Geb, who in fact was the personification of earth. And they were born out of Tefnut, which translates as like a moisture. They were born out of Tefnut, out of moisture, and Shu, the father, saw that they were born clinging in a sexual union and separated them. And as he pulled them apart, light was born in this area between them. So light began in this separation of night and day, of the above and the below. A very, very beautiful and profound concept. Another, once Nut, the great above, once she was pushed up and separated from earth below, she remained attached with her feet and with her hands, and the entire cosmos happened inside, the whole creation story. And for the Egyptians, The movement of the sun became the primary manifestation of the concept of empire in the sense of the pharaoh being the manifestation, the sort of symbol, the living symbol of the sun. The sun is born in the morning from the body of Nut and travels all through the day. Actually, there are 6 here, but actually they numbered the day as 12. And at night is swallowed and taken back into the body. Now, yesterday we saw the image of Nekhbet, the goddess of darkness, who swallowed the sun at the end of the day. And the agent of the swallowing is the goddess Nut. So it's her body arcing over the earth, attached to the earth and arcing over the earth, which separates the possibility of night and day and defines the track of the sun. As we know, the sun rises on one side and moves to the other side, comes back down through the underworld and rises again the next day. This is another, this is my own image, but based on another Egyptian goddess called Hathor, who is this slide is a little bit cut off. She's actually holding a line, which is the great above, and she's standing on a line, which is the great below. So that she is the above line, she is the below line. She carries all of the sun and the moon, the planets, everything in her body. Midway is sky and water. So her feet reach down to the depth of the watery abyss and up into the height of the great above. And this is also based on another Egyptian myth about the goose that laid the golden egg. Again, the goose was there, kind of like the Binu Bird from the beginning of time. And it was a female goose. She circled and circled and circled, looking for something between heaven and sea where she could land and make a nest. And she finally found a little something floating on the surface and came down and built her nest. And having built her nest, she laid the one egg, which is the egg of the universe. And in this egg is all that is. And this is another common creation story, the understanding of creation as an egg which breaks open and everything that is spills out and then finds its place in the universe. These are the sacred yellow beans associated with this particular goddess. So this midway point, she is the great above, she is the great below. That, by the way, is the origin of the tale, the Jack and the Beanstalk. When Jack climbs the beanstalk, he does it to steal the egg of creation. It's one of the wonderful manifestations of patriarchy taking over matriarchy. No, I don't mean that this image has anything to do with Jack and the Beanstalk. I just mean that the theme is a theme, again, how these world creation stories move through time and were reinterpreted. And this, in 19th century Germany, this one was one of the myths that was somehow seeped into German literature as the stealing of the egg. Now let's look, again, our theme this morning, birth and death. Let's look at a few of these beautiful images through time. Again, one of the most common images all over the world in all civilizations, as you can imagine, the Aboriginal image of a woman giving birth to a child. This is one of the great masterpieces in the Archaeological Museum in Mexico City. This is one of the phases of the moon. Obviously, probably one of the phases of the Great Mother in her fullness, where when she is full, she is in her greatest power, and in this greatest power, pushes out the mystery of her own continuity. It's an amazing piece. I wish I had a slide that I could show you to show you the back of it, because to anchor to enclose this activity and to anchor herself, so to speak, as she pushes the child out. She's actually got her hands around her ankles, so that compositionally it closes in the composition in a most wonderful way. And the difference between the agony, her agony, and the child floating out as carefree as a little fish is a beautiful relationship. This is one of the great images in all of art history. It's quite astonishing. And these images are varied from something very realistic, like you just saw, to this amazing piece from the 9th century BC in China. Women in these squatting, giving birth positions. And of course, pottery being the realm of women. My image of a vessel. Here are the Sandia Mountains on our western horizon, and the Rio Grande, and this is the desert, and this is the place I talked about yesterday, the Pueblo of Quahua, the ruined Pueblo of Quahua. It's called actually Coronado Monument. Of course, these places are always given, just like all the mountains around us are given male names by the guy who climbed to the top and measured it. All the sacred mountains have false names, like Mount Taylor and so on. So does Quahua. Is called Coronado Monument because he and his people, his band of warriors and Franciscan priests. These conquistadores moved around with a whole array of practically a village, following him. Anyway, they left behind diseases which soon, of course, destroyed this particular monument, this particular pueblo, but it is fascinating to see. And although it is a square kiva, in this composition I have made it round because, of course, even is a square kiva, it's still the womb of the earth. And you go down the ladder, and the paintings are on the walls of the kiva. So here is the Great Mother as the bottom line of creation, just like that image we just saw of Hathor with her arms up and her feet down, defining the great below. So she defines the great below and the great above. Her hands come out of the mountains and reach up like hands like birds to contain and define the sun and the moon in place. So this is the land. This is a specific New Mexico landscape and a specific Albuquerque landscape. This is an image from Africa, and it's a body mask that young women of this particular village, and I don't know the name of this tribe, when they came into their first bleeding, they danced, they tied on, and this I can show you tomorrow when you come to the studio. At the side of here, there are two holes where leather or some thong would have been tied, and these were actually tied on to their little bodies, and they danced in a celebratory way as they entered their womanhood to profess their womanhood and the fullness of potential that they would grow into as the mothers, the continuity of mothering within their tribes. It's a beautiful, beautiful wooden piece. It's a piece of hollowed out wood. And my image of memory, because memory is also about birthing and rebirthing. Memory is rebirthing. Memory is, of course, receiving experiences of whatever through, of course, we know everything we know through our senses. So our five senses continue to nourish us even through the night, obviously, and our faculty of imagination, our faculty of dreaming, is the container for a different sensory world, so to speak. But even that world, obviously, is based on reality of our smelling and our in all of our senses, our touching. So this image called memory is the birthing. I mean, so that when you activate your memory, you are rebirthing the experience. So memory is all about rebirthing, rebirthing. So here I am in my grandmother's arms, swinging through the hot Little Rock, Arkansas afternoons and into the evenings. And this is an angel of night coming in with the sounds of night, the castanets, the rhythms of night. Castanets, of course, are about rhythm. And this is a particular gardenia bush, which in fact was in my grandmother's front yard. Here is another image of birthing, the Great Mother as the center of creation, inside a mandorla, which are, in fact, it's like a necklace of feathers with the four phases of the moon. We forget that the dark of moon is of course, a very distinct phase of the moon. And in her center, at the very center of her being, is her creativity. And this image is based on another of the great New Mexican Native American tales about Spider Woman. In the beginning there was nothing. Again, like all these creation stories, in the beginning there was nothing. There was simply the void, the darkness from the beginning. And Spider Woman appeared, and she simply was there in this void. And at a certain point, she began, and this was the beginning of creation, she began drawing forth from her body a thread. It kept coming, it kept coming, it kept coming. And at some point she bit it off, so to speak, and threw it out into this void. And it floated, it just stayed floating there. And then she again pulled and pulled and pulled another long cord from her body. And again she cast that into the void. And the two ribbons, so to speak, floated around. And at a certain point they crossed. And as soon as she saw the crossing, she went there and she sat. And when she got to the place of crossing where she sat, she started singing. And as she sang, all of these threads, each song was like a thread which moved out and created all that is. So that this song created grass, and another song created a tree, and another song created a star. It's a fabulous creation story. But what's interesting to me about this image is that she had to get to the center in order to create. And this is an image I want to give all of you. It's the place where we pray from and be from and create from is our center. But we have to go through ritual, so to speak, in order to establish the center. And I think you can take that information, so to speak, and think about it and pray about it. To get to the center is an act of will. To place and even when you get there, to place yourself in the silence, that imaginary place of the crossing in your own imagination, where you can sit there at the center of yourself. When you're there at that crossing in the center of yourself, you are in the center of her. Anyway, and so as she creates all that is, everything remains attached to her. And at a certain point, she reaches out and pulls it back into herself. So here she is, holding the thread of each life of all that is. And it's a labyrinth. As we know, life is anything but a straight line. It is in the most complicated labyrinth we can imagine. This image is called Holy Wisdom. Now I want to show you some images from a Copper Age, a whole series of early tribal settlements in the area of southern Turkey, which is now called Anatolia. And excavations began there in the 1950s and shut down for a while and now have reopened. And they are working on these early Copper Age, it's called the Chalcolithic age, early settlements of earliest peoples. And the particular one has engaged so many scholars and artists too, because the images are so interesting to artists. Anyway, the name of this place, as I say, is Chateau Huyuk. It's in southern Turkey. And the images there tell us that this particular society was a matriarchal society. And what, again, interests me enormously is that when they, as they began digging up and investigating all of the graves there, they found that all of the creative accoutrements were in the graves of women. All of the tools for weaving, all of the tools for making imagery, all of the tools for painting, tools for painting, for carving, for making, for weaving, for painting, all of that, all of those tools were in the graves of women. The colors are black, white, and red. The white associated with the virgin phase, the red, the mother phase, and the black, of course, the grandmother phase, the triple goddess. The phases of the understanding of the goddess manifesting through the phases of the moon from the beginning of time. She is a young mother, always in this birth-giving position. This kind of frog-like position is considered the birth-giving position. She has a web behind her. From ancient times, the web has always been associated with the Great Mother as the weaver of all life, the weaver of all that is, the maker. She weaves all that is, and the bird associated with her is the great vulture. So that in an image like this, we have the Great Mother, young in her childbearing years, so to speak, in a state, so to speak, of continually giving birth, and the vulture in relationship to her as the other end of the cycle, the devouring, death as the devourer of all that is. So the Great Mother is she who brings all of life into existence, and then at the other end of the cycle, the dark end of the cycle, so to speak, the dark phase of the moon, devours all that is, takes it into her body. And the bull, from the beginning, associated with the goddess, the birthing principle, because of the shape of the bucranium, the bull's skull, and the sweep of the horns representing the fallopian tubes. This is an interesting image because of the Gestalt imagery. So you first of all see the Great Mother with these two leopards on either side of her. Some of the earliest manifestations of the Great Mother as Lady of the Beasts. Her daughters down here, again with the image of the bucranium, the masculine energy between them. But here we have these like hidden figures, the two animals up here. And so she has four animals, in fact, worshiping her. She's in a throne. These are the arms of the throne. The thrones are again a repetition of these leopards. And this shape, it looks like a kind of flying comb, is another manifestation of the vulture. And and these images are images of the vulture, like turned sideways flying. And the vulture, of course, any of the birds of prey are always symbols of the Great Mother, because again, they are the manifestation of the other side of the cycle. She who gives birth to all receives all back into her body. And how does she do that? She does it in relationship to the birds who live off carrion, and the whole mystery of eating dead flesh, taking it into your body and renewing it as living flesh is the mystery of the carrion birds, and therefore why they are symbols of her presence in creation. And again, there are thousands and thousands of these images of her. We'll just remind you of a few of them. This is one of the great ones from the Paleolithic period, probably 15 or 20,000 BC from France. If you're ever in southern France, be sure you visit there are many caves there. You can see fabulous Paleolithic paintings. people don't know that there are many, many minor caves that you can get into. And you can be face to face, this close to Paleolithic paintings. Here is this, the swollen thighs, the swollen buttocks, the swollen breasts, and the arms lying over the swollen breasts is a kind of framing, a kind of the graceful resting of the forearms over the breasts to kind of accentuate them. And none of them with feet, because of course these were made to, they were carried around, simply stuffed into, you know, simple clothing. And when the women sat down to, you know, on the ground to, you know, grind her grain, whatever, do some weaving, would simply take it out of her clothing and put it down in the ground. So the images were carried around, much as we carry around fetishes today and keep them with us, just to have the energy enclosed in near our flesh. The famous Willendorf image, this is in the Ethnological Museum in Vienna. This is an image that I first saw as a child in a kind of dream vision, and then saw again when I lived in Vienna in my 20s. Again, these upper arms, I mean the arms lying over the breasts as if to frame them, and the head covered with these, I saw them as a child, I understood them as waves of water. It's really a kind of coiling of the hair to like a veil, to hide her hiddenness. This is another beautiful piece in the Archaeological Museum in Mexico City. The Great Mother in a place of eternal pregnancy. This beautiful gaze in this permanent state of beatitude, of being pleased with her eternal pregnancy, of this energy of giving birth to all that is. One of the great artists from the Renaissance in Italy, Piero della Francesca, here's another image, beautiful image of threshold. So we have to understand that this was an enclosed tabernacle, so to speak, and these beautiful angels are pulling aside the curtains to let you enter the mystery. So you are crossing this threshold to behold the Virgin, the pregnant Virgin. So she herself has opened her garment, and herself points to she as the container, so that in fact it's like her body is the threshold, beyond, in the interiority of the carrier of the Godhead, the Theotokos, in the Greek word Theotokos, the God bearer. So here is an image of Mary as the God bearer inside this beautiful, beautiful tabernacle, the revelation of the mystery. So the parting of the curtains here and the parting of the curtains of her cloak. Another Huichol piece, the yarn paintings I talked about yesterday. Here's a woman who's come apart. Again, the center of the composition is the act of the child leaving its mother's womb. The woman is tended by two shamans, obviously male, female, and she has brought her 4 friends from the village with her, and each woman is pregnant. Can you see the little red embryo inside each woman's body? So they are like floating in their own, like contained in their own aura of pregnancy, and partaking in the star energy. What I love about this energy is this perfect perfect relationship between the energy of the above and the energy from the below, all rising up and entering this woman. This particular star coming right down into her, the star that this child will be born under. The waters of the birth waters are the same as the waters from the above phase of the moon. These spirits above. So it's not just the reality of vegetation. This beautiful serpent also associated with birthing energy. Beautiful, beautiful composition. And in this conversation, this woman receiving this energy from the prayer stick, everybody united in this energy, in this most wonderful, and everybody united with each other from the spirit world around this woman, connected to this woman. And this line in Huichol work always represents like a mystic journey. So here are these 4 women who have come out into this place that the woman has chosen to bear her child. Again, this double spiral, this goes back eons and eons and eons, always representing the Great Mother as the beginning, the evolution, the midpoint, and then into the devolution, the moving back down, growing up into life, reaching a midpoint, and then letting go as we literally wind down, having done our work, as we get to the point where we are ending our work that we've been given to do in the world. And specific images of the Great Mother in her death aspect. She is the hag who devours. As she's the mother who gives birth, she also eats. She eats death. She takes death into her body. And therefore these images, many fabulous ones from both Mexico and from India, very often, especially India, she's represented as like a cadaver. The image of these shrunken cadavers can be kind of alarming when you're in a whole room full of them. Very, very powerful. And yet is fluid and is beautiful as the life part of the phase, the fullness of life phase. This is the fullness of death phase, the diminishing old moon. She is literally disappearing. And how do they show that? She's disappearing because her flesh is disappearing. She's always shown as if she's starving to death. You see, all of her ribs are showing. And the message clearly, just as she can't get enough of giving birth, she can't get enough of eating death, consuming death, taking us back into her body, taking us back into the earth, into fire, into water. Remember that the four elements we talk about have nothing to do really with physics, because we know that the elements, there are multiple elements, but in the beginning, from ancient times, the elements were those 4 symbolic elements of water, air, earth, fire, and therefore the goddess was, of course, a manifestation at any given time of any one of those elements, and those were the 4 primary ways that corpses were cared for after death. They were clearly either buried or set out to sea, or they were set into a burning pyre, or the air is sometimes mysterious to people. The air means that they were placed on platforms and exposed to the birds of the air. Again, the images like we just saw from Çatalhöyük, so that the birds of the air, all of the great carrion-eating animals and birds. And again, that mystery of taking decay into your body and reviving it, bringing it back to life as living flesh, whether as an animal or as a bird. This is the same theme, obviously manifests differently. We're in a different time, in a different place. These are the beautiful images of a Grandmother Death. She's always called Grandmother Death in Mexico. Of the devouring goddess in Mexico, And I'm sure you know, those of you who have any connection with Hispanic culture know how huge the Day of the Dead is in Mexico, and certainly in New Mexico, where the graves are visited and food is brought to the cemeteries and to the mausoleums and left for the dead. And that we in our memory can continue to feed the dead. It's a marvelous manifestation externally of how we continue to feed the dead in our memories. By remembering the dead, we keep them alive. It's like that very remembering is setting out food for them. Greek societies do this also, remembering the dead and bringing them food and flowers. Now I want to show you some images of the Mother Enthroned. This is a very, very ancient image of her, and very often wonderfully abstracted into so that the lap is like a seat. Although this is a little votive statue, you could even think of this as like a chaise lounge. You could go lie in her lap. This is a piece found in Palestine, remembering, of course, that what we call the Holy Land was for millions of years prior to that, the land of the Great Mother. It's interesting to read the Bible in relationship to the tribal peoples who were there before the Israelites simply wiped them out. The Israelites, of course, were a warring people, as of course it's contemporary history. They don't want anyone else there. And it's interesting to read all of the prophetic books in the Old Testament and hear the voice of the Judaic prophets railing against the Great Mother. Get thee down from the high places. Well, the high places are always the places where the Great Mother was worshipped. Get thee down from the mountains. Get thee down from the trees. Get thee down from the wild places. In other words, come away from the wilderness, which is a manifestation of her presence, and come away and worship in the temple. Anyway, here she is inviting you to come sit in her lap. And when I say that this is a votive image, it means that when the person was buried or entombed in a large ceramic jar, that these little statues were placed with the dead person in the grave, however the person was interned after life. Sometimes they are images like this, sometimes they are simply little chairs. They look very much like the chairs that we're sitting in as I speak. So the understanding that even an empty chair in a tomb means that the soul is given a place to sit in her lap as it's buried. This is from the civilization of the Tigris-Euphrates, one of the great centers of the origin of civilization. And this will be after the Bronze Age has started. It's in the Bronze Age when you begin to get images of the gods in relationship to the goddess. And in the beginning, the gods are always the sons of the Great Mother, and little by little through time, they take on an energy quite separate from her. But for thousands of years, the gods and the goddesses lived side by side, so to speak, with equal power. Obeisance was paid to both equally. They may have had separate temples, like a temple of Demeter and a temple of, let's say, Mars. But they lived in harmony, and you did obeisance to both gods and goddesses. And it's only very gradually that the goddesses disappeared and the masculine principle was elevated. So here is a beautiful, this will be a priestess, this beautiful feathered gown she's wearing, ceremonially dressed for some high feast day. And she's sitting in the position of the divine hierogamos, the masculine energy from the above. The sacred marriage takes place unlike the platform. It's like her body has become an altar for the above energy, which has always been considered the verification or expression of the masculine energy, comes down and rests and is contained in her powerful womb area. This is the largest, one of the few and the largest images, ceramic images from Çatalhöyük. It was found at the very bottom of what had been for storing grain. So here is the same theme, the seated Great Mother, older now than the painted images of her, show her as a young woman. Here she is as an elderly woman, seated on the same throne, the same leopards. Some people, scholars, feel that this object between her legs is in fact her birthing, that the child has dropped in her birthing, in her seated birthing stool. This is the child, the perpetual child coming from the body. Other scholars say, no, this is clearly the Great Mother in her as grandmother, as the last phase of the moon, when her childbearing work is over, and yet gaining the size has to do with magnitude in terms of energy. Not pregnancy.
How big is this?
This is about 16 to 18 inches square.
That's pretty massive.
It's quite an amazing piece. It's one of the oldest pieces we have from the Chalcolithic period. In fact, it's the only piece of any stature that we have from that period. This is, again, back into the Tigris-Euphrates, the area we today call Iran, Iraq. Here are two priests coming forward and doing obeisance, worshiping her presence, even though we don't see her presence. We are worshiping, so the throne itself is always emblematic of her power, of her energy. And we still have this understanding of being enthroned. When a bishop is made a bishop, he is enthroned. When a senator goes to Washington, he is enthroned. To be enthroned is to be put in the lap of the Divine Mother, the original seat of all authority. Because we think of enthroned, kings and queens, enthroned. It is the very sitting in the throne, in the lap of the Great Mother, which gives you the power to speak from that throne. After I had made my final vows in the monastery, the abbess led me to my choir stall, and I was enthroned symbolically. This was my place, given a place in the family of that particular family of women vowed to an enclosed life. And when a child in your lap is enthroned inside, contained inside your energy, it's a very, very powerful symbol moving through time. And I hope that you will, when you go away back into the rhythms of your own life, that you will use this just sitting quietly in your chair and feeling that you are at the center, not only of yourself, you are at the center of her. And you are enthroned in her, and she is the source of the energy which will manifest through you. So here is a beautiful image, elegant, gorgeous ivory carving. It's a plaque, probably a plaque that would have been the cover of a liturgical book of some kind. And of course now here is the Great Mother as Mary inside the Catholic Church. This is from Byzantium. You know that, I'm sure you know, the original, the greatest rise and glory of early Christianity wasn't in Rome, it was in Byzantium, and only gradually shifted to the area we now call Italy. So this piece would be from the 450, 500, something like that, 1500 years old. This undoubtedly says the equivalent of Theotokos, the God-bearer. So here is Mary, now in this elaborate Byzantine throne, seated in the throne as Theotokos, the God-bearer. She is still highly honored, much more highly honored in terms of continuity and in reality, much more highly honored today in the Russian and Greek Orthodoxy than in the Catholic Church, where she has gradually, since Vatican II, been devalued, so to speak, enormously. And it's left to we women to keep her enthroned in our hearts. And now the child very often is not the infant suckling, but is the child turned, as you see, forward now as the young teaching Jesus. And he holds his hand, in his hand he holds the scroll. Remember that in early days, writing was done on scrolls of parchment, not on sheets of paper. So Theotokos, the God-bearer, now coming to rest inside after millennia, coming to rest inside the patriarchal Catholic Church, East and West. Beautiful, beautiful image now. I love this image. Anne, Saint Anne in the Catholic Church. In the Bible, we never hear anything about Mary's mother, obviously, but one of the things I love about the storytelling Catholic Church is that they provide the story where there isn't really a story. So that the Catholic Church, as Jung says, is always the container for all of the old stories from the beginning of time, and all the old stories of the Great Mother, whereas the Protestant tradition is based entirely on life, so to speak, after the Judaic history. Goes back only to the Judaic history. I remember as a child going to the cemetery, and you always knew where all the Catholics were buried, where all the Protestants were buried, because all of us had names like Patrick and James and John and the apostles and all of the saints in the church, the Catherines and so on. And the Protestants were always Josiah and Joshua and Jeremiah and all these wonderful prophets from the Old Testament. Anyway, so this is St. Anne, which of course is just, as I say, a Catholic story. It has nothing to do with any information we have from the New Testament. So here is an image of St. Anne holding Mary. And of course, what are we looking at? We're looking at an image of this beautiful, bright red goddess holding her daughter, which goes right back to ancient times. Some of the images I'll show you, if not today, one of these days. And this is a piece from Pisa. It will be from the late 1100s or early 1200s. This beautiful, and red always associated, of course, with power and energy. So this beautiful red goddess holding her child and holding Mary. One of my own images in the Mother's Songs, based on a dream. The Great Mother with me enthroned deeply in her lap. This is a good example of how a painting can change radically. It's only when this painting was well advanced and moving toward being finished that this wonderful leopard appeared, shoved right into the painting, and I had to rearrange the entire composition to give him space to be. He caused me a lot of problems. Another enthroned goddess, my grandmother, and imagine, I mean, it isn't like a portrait of my grandmother, but this is called the grandmother, and here she is enthroned. Her elderly hands in right at the center of her own creativity. And this again is how paintings begin. It's always so mysterious. This painting began with this dog. You have to imagine there's nothing here at all, and this dog appeared, and then at a certain point it was clear the dog was looking at something. I had no idea what. And then little by little this figure appeared, and only at the end this dog was still looking at something, and I didn't know what. And only when her legs came down and sort of defined the space between them did this rug start happening, so that the dog was staring at this space even before the rest of the imagery happened. So this is an image of my own great mother in tribute to my beloved Mima. This is a memory of the only image that hung in her house, which was a dime store print from Woolworth's. And so it's the image of my own sacred trinity of moon, dog, and grandmother. And just a few images briefly now, dreaming the Great Mother pushing us down into sleep, as if in sleep we go down, down, down into our depths. Very often, in this case, with a guide into our dreams. And as we go down into these energies, these Aboriginal energies, this flowers that grow with their roots buried down in the dark wetness, grow up and then open in relationship to the light of the moon and the light of the day, pushed down into sleep and into dreams by her. An image of sleeping dreaming. It's called Sleeping with Our Mother. My dad at some point went north looking for work in Chicago, and we stayed in Little Rock. We had a room in a boarding house a couple of blocks from Mima and Grandpa's house, and I slept on the floor in a pallet, which actually, when I painted it, it was really a mattress, and I thought, you know what? It wasn't a mattress. It was just every night my mother just folded some blankets together and put them on the floor. And oh God, I always had dogs around me, yes. The fourth baby is my mother's last little girl, last child, who died a few days after she was born. So she became kind of an angel baby in our lives. And this great image of dancing with the Divine Mother. It's dancing with Artemis in my kitchen between the fire and the water, between the stove and the sink. And at the very end of the painting, this great lion slewed across the entire mystery as if to guard and hide the mystery. And another dream image of how she wanders, comes into our sleep at night bearing gifts, glides through. In this case, she's gliding through on the back, so to speak, of a great serpent who has laid a nest of eggs here. I think that she's the image of the moon moving toward her grandmother, her final stage. And this is just me asleep. I think that's the last one, yes. Okay, folks.